Welcome to our new week. This week, we're going to talk about critical thinking and how that applies to college and college success. Kind of really look into what critical thinking is. So, I know that I think I mentioned I really like the memes. So, for this week, this one's one of my favorites. So, you're the best teacher I've ever had. You've opened my eyes to the world and showed me how to think critically. I was happy until I met you. And that's kind of what critical thinking is you're looking at different things that are applied to critical thinking. You know, when we are in grade school, elementary school, we're really taught to look at, the basic questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how. You know, who said it? What did they say? Where did they say it? Was it, in a private, public? When did they say it? Was it, before an event, after an event? But these are the questions that we, really looked at in the beginning before we broadened our horizon on the critical thinking. So we're going to move into actual critical thinking and applying critical thinking. So how can determining the situation help you think critically? How you present informed, unbiased thinking. So that unbiased thinking, have you ever been in a situation where you were trying to have a discussion with someone who disagreed with you, that they were so passionate about that subject that you couldn't, get a word in, you couldn't, give your opinion, you couldn't state your thought? All of us at some point have done this, so we're really looking at identifying that your topic, okay, being able to gather and research facts, but taking away that bias. We're totally eliminating that bias and just looking at it by organizing the material. And then once we've organized it, we've eliminated our bias and we've gathered and researched our information, we're going to look at how to finally present that material. And then what's the difference between a factual argument and opinion? So you're gathering information versus just stating an opinion. Like I don't like anything with palm oil. You can say that that's an opinion, but then, you could gather information and say, I really don't like palm oil because it is, detrimental to the orangutan habitat. And you can state your information and how you found that information out. So just because you doesn't necessarily agree with a topic doesn't always mean that it's factual. So understanding the difference is very important to being able to think critically. All right, so these are questions that a real critical thinking is going to ask. So what's happening? So you're gathering information and you're forming your questions. So critical thinking is going to differ according to different subjects that you're thinking about. So because of that, it may be difficult to pin down any sort of formula. There's no perfect way to make sure that you're doing a good job of thinking critically. Really, when you're looking about thinking critically, you want to look at both sides of an argument. And there might even be 3 or 4 sides to an argument. So it may not just be 2 sides to an argument. Then you have to also look at that changes are going to happen, and they may alter your conclusions when changes happen. So you have to go back and understand that you may have to revisit an issue that you've already effectively resolved and adapt your changing conditions to your critical thinking. So knowing when to do that is another example of critical thinking and being flexible. So when you're developing the problem, you're determining what the problem is, you have different components that you're going to use to get started. So question everything. All right, so this is questioning. Let's look at COVID, for example. You want to question the mask mandate. You want to question the legitimacy of a mask. Is it helpful? Is it harmful? And then conduct legitimate research. So you want to go to different websites. You want to talk to, people in different fields that may have more medically sound opinions based on the research that they've done. And then you want to limit your assumptions. There's so much social media that's going around that are saying, oh, well, I'm getting sick because I'm wearing a mask. So you have to limit your assumptions. You have to take your assumptions out of the equation. Recognize that you may be for or against the mask mandate, but now you have to take whatever your own bias is and eliminate that. And then once you do that and you take out your own bias, then you can gather and weigh all the options. All right. So again, like I said earlier, you have to understand that changes are going to happen. Especially like, for example, with COVID, the information is going to be revolving. So you want to make sure that as it revolves, so does your research, so does your gathering of information. All of that's going to continue to change, as with it should in any kind of critical thinking question. So defending against bias, this is something that's super important. You want to look at, once you have all of your information gathered together and you've checked for your sources and your validity of your argument, now you need to look at how you're going to present your information. All right. This step, you really need to be careful. Again, and we're going to keep circling back to your own personal bias. You want to make sure that you try to eliminate that as much as possible. So you have to look at facts versus beliefs. Okay, so your fact is a statement. It's true, it's backed up with evidence, it can be verified through research or observation. And your opinion, it's a statement someone holds to be true without supporting evidence. Opinions express beliefs, assumptions, perceptions, or judgments. So understanding that, let's look at, you could say, for an opinion, blue is the best color. Well, that's your opinion. But if you were to conduct research and find evidence to support this claim, you could say something like, researchers at Oxford University recognize that the use of blue paint in mental hospitals reduces heart rates by 25% and contributes to fewer angry outbursts from patients. Well, this now has changed. It's changed from blue is the best color, from an opinion to an informed analysis. So now you have credible evidence to support your claim that blue is a good color because it helps, fewer outbursts from patients in mental hospitals. So you're changing your information. Well, not everybody's going to agree with your analysis, and that can be frustrating. So, people resist change. They have very firm beliefs on important issues, and they have, less significant preferences. So with all the competing information, online, on the news, in general conversation, it's confusing to make decisions. So looking at reliable, valid sources that claim different approaches is something that's going to help you in your critical thinking, because all you can do is sort information, conduct your own research, check your sources, and then clearly and concisely provide your analysis on the information that you consider based on what you're doing. So you can't force others to accept your stance, but you can show evidence in support of your thinking. You can be persuasive without being pushy, and lapsing into personal bias. And then the rest is up to the person that's viewing your analysis. Okay, so these are ways to present your information without being overly, pushy on your data that you're presenting. So, there's ways that you can use your critical thinking in college specifically. For example, making your choices how to spend time outside of your classroom. Well, if you know that you have an assignment due, well, you have the choice of, you can go to dinner with your friends, or you can work on your assignment. What's the pros and cons of that? Are you still able to go to dinner and work on your assignment? Thinking of time management. How are you going to spend time during a class discussion that's online? Are you going to make it? Are you going to show up and be present? Are you going to watch the recording later? Are you going to, just say to heck with it, not do it at all? How is that going to affect your grade? Is it, do you feel confident that you don't have to attend? Do you feel confident that, being able to pause things and later go back and view them, that works for you? So really, that's another way to really use that critical thinking in college. Looking at what your majors are. Should you switch? Should you stay with what you're going with? So these are all ways that are ways just every day of using that critical thinking in college and how to do that. So there's 5 steps for critical thinking in college. Asking questions, you're doing an analysis, and you want to answer them. So that's really step 1. Step 2 is communication. Evaluate your reactions and then even go back and look at what other people's reactions to your questions or your analysis are. And step 3, you're going to analyze that information with a critical lens. So in other words, open-mindedness, okay? Being open to having opinions change. Then, step 4, so you're making connections and you're keeping that big picture in mind, by problem solving. So all aspects of college academic life require you to use critical thinking skills. Your instructors are going to expect you to think more critically and carefully. So thinking freely is great, but you want to be able to think analytically. You want to put things in order. You want to be able to ask questions, but if someone offers a fresh perspective, to be able to respectfully appreciate what the thought that they're bringing that is different. So kind of being willing to think outside of that box, because critical thinking is the core of college education. So back to our steps. So, the step 1 of asking questions and answering them. So it's going to help you clarify the details, clear up confusion, and it's going to push for a deeper understanding of the material, and then evaluating that communication. So you're evaluating your reaction because you're asking yourself not only whether that argument makes sense, but whether or not you believe it or other people believe it. And then that open-mindedness, that critical lens, well, you're trying to poke holes in arguments because you're asking what's missing. Has any evidence or information been forgotten, covered up, ignored? These are what that step 3 is looking for. And then, keeping that bigger picture in mind, that step 4, you're stepping back, okay? You're synthesizing that information. You're putting it all together. You're learning in order to see that bigger picture. So synthesizing means that you're combining information in a coherent and meaningful way while making connections. It can clarify what's most important. And then, step 5, so now you're applying it to your life experiences, because the more you can bring your past experiences into your college learning process, the more powerful your critical thinkings will be. Okay, if you personalize that material, you make it matter to you. And if you make it matter to you, the more likely you're to think deeply about it. So, engaging in that critical thinking, it's not easy. Okay, but you can learn to become better at doing it. So you want to avoid being a passive observer during lectures. So just because you agree with everything that your instructor says or your classmates say may prevent you from thinking critically, because you're just agreeing with what they're saying, even though, because sometimes you don't want to question that what they're saying. I mean, and it's okay to agree if you truly agree, but just you don't want to be passive. You don't want to just observe. And then, remember that your perspective is valuable. It's different. It's new. You're not going to have the same perspective as your other classmates because your life and experiences are different. So sharing and understanding your reactions to material will enhance your thinking and others. So try to ask any questions that you have. If you're not asking questions, you're really not engaging in critical thinking. because you want to be able to, again, broaden that picture, have an open mind, looking at things differently, and then making that personal connection. It can increase your interest and motivation to study. So you can think and perform deeply and more successfully if you try to make that personal connection. So these kinds of things that can help are like study groups. They can be really great sources of creativity because you have multiple viewpoints coming together. So I mean, and the downside to that is that sometimes you can have very few opinions that come in to dominate the group discussion. So you need to make sure that you go against what we call the group think. You want to make sure that you stay true to your own thought process and conclusions, but have that open mind. So these are kind of helpful information on looking at critical thinking in a different way. So remembering, so you're retrieving knowledge and information from your long-term memory. You're understanding, so constructing meaning from different messages. So what's the main idea? Can you find an example of what happens next? Then you're going to analyze that information. You're going to separate it into different parts, and you're going to determine how it kind of connects together. What's that relationship? Is it relevant to what you're looking at? And then you're going to, evaluate that information. So you're making judgments based on different criteria. What is more important? Can you defend pros and cons? Then you're going to apply that information. So what approach would you use to practically be able to apply this information? And the last is create. So you're combining different elements or ideas to form a new new element, a new idea. So how has that changed? How has that evolved and adapted? And lastly is you're going to build your critical thinking muscles. So when you're reading something, when you're listening to something, when you're watching something, what's your immediate reaction? Okay, that's going to help you. Was it good, bad, indifferent? What's that? Looking at the other side of the argument. You may be for the mask mandate. Well, what is what's the other side to the argument? Why would this be a bad thing? Do you have any questions about certain material? These are all things that you really, really, really should be writing down and looking at it. So, when a topic is being debated or discussed, coming up with counter arguments, even if you agree with what they're being said. So you're kind of stretching yourself to consider more than one side of the debate. And then, before each new class session, write down questions, that you might have about the material, even if it's already been covered, because your questions may be answered, but they may not be, but then you're prepared to have those questions available. And, how does it connect to what you've already learned? So at the end of each class, you could look at ways that the material could be connected to previous classes, and you could write that in your notes. And then lastly, how does this relate to my life? So looking at during study sessions, figuring out if there's at least one way the material could be meaningfully related to your life, and have that. So these are all ways that critical thinking is really going to be applied to college and in general. You just want to broaden your horizons. You can kind of think about it in like Shrek. If you've never watched it, watch it. It's a very good movie, kid movie. But it's kind of like an onion. You're going to peel away the different layers of that onion until you get to the middle and to the mushy parts, because that's what you want to do with a question, a critical thinking question, is you want to peel away the layers until you get to the really squishy parts to figure out how to do that. So that's all that we have for this week. And I'm not sure if I've pointed this out to you, but